The late-night shift at Maggie's diner was usually a quiet, comforting kind of tired. It was the kind of place you found tucked away near the university in a town where everybody knew everybody, the kind of town that felt just as much like home in suburban London as it did in Toronto or outside Kingston, Jamaica. And there she was, Elara. She was 27 years old, but her life had given her the kind of deep weariness that usually belonged to someone much older. Elara was a woman you might pass on the street and think, she's got a kind face, and you'd be right. Her eyes, a soft hazel color, were framed by long dark lashes, but tonight they held the flat, heavy look of exhaustion. Her smile, which she usually wore easily, had been put away for the night. She stood barely 5'5", and the diner uniform, a crisp light blue button-down and a dark apron, hung loosely on her small frame. She wasn't trying to save the world, she was just trying to save enough money for the next month's rent. That was the story of her life, and she faced it every day with the quiet, stubborn spirit of a woman who just refused to lose. Right now, Elara was wiping down the counter, the smell of burnt coffee and cleaning spray hanging faintly in the air. There were only 2 customers left, an old couple sharing pie in a booth near the window. The bell above the door jangled, a sound that usually meant one last late-night coffee order. Elara straightened up, expecting another sleepy student. But the man who walked in was anything but sleepy. He was tall, truly imposing, and the energy he brought into the small diner felt like a sudden drop in temperature. He wasn't dressed for a diner. He wore a charcoal gray suit that looked impossibly expensive, the kind of tailoring that suggested money wasn't just made, it was inherited. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, like a mountain that had decided to walk. This was Victor Moretti. You didn't need a newspaper headline to tell you who he was. The air around him just told you. His face was sharp, almost painfully handsome, but etched with a deep, consuming sorrow. His dark hair was slicked back, showing eyes that were dark, almost black, and usually empty of any feeling. He was the kind of man who commanded silence without saying a word. In the criminal world they called him the architect, because he built his empire with chilling precision. Tonight, though, he looked less like an architect and more like a ghost haunted by his own blueprints. Victor slid into the last booth by the back wall, a move that seemed to swallow the small space whole. Elara picked up a menu and walked over. Her steps were professional and quick. She always treated everyone the same, whether they were an exhausted trucker or a man wearing a 5-figure suit. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft but clear. "We're winding down, but the coffee is still fresh and the soup of the day is split pea." Victor didn't look up right away. He kept his head bowed, the shadow of the diner light falling across his face. When he finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, the world inside the small diner seemed to stop completely. It wasn't a look of recognition, not exactly. It was raw, immediate shock. His dark eyes went wide and his entire body, which had been so rigid and commanding, seemed to deflate right there in the booth. He wasn't looking at a waitress. He was looking at something that should not exist. For 3 years, Victor Moretti had carried a grief so heavy it had nearly crushed him. The death of his wife, Alessia, had taken the light out of his life and left only the cold mathematics of crime. Alessia had been his only weakness, his only truth. She had died in a tragic accident, a sudden, final end to their story. But standing right there holding a menu was Alessia. Elara was a twin he never knew existed. The exact same high cheekbones, the slight tilt of the nose, the way the dark hair fell just so around her face. Even the tiny, nearly invisible freckle by her left ear was there. It was a perfect, impossible mirror image. Elara noticed the change right away. The man wasn't just surprised, he was terrified. His breath caught in a rattling gasp. "Sir," Elara prompted gently, a flicker of concern replacing her professional neutrality. "Are you all right?" Victor didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at her, his lips parting slightly. He reached one hand up slowly as if to touch her, but his fingers shook so violently he dropped it back to the table. In a voice that was barely a whisper, a voice that was used to giving commands that changed countries, he said 2 words that seemed to hang in the quiet air like smoke. "I'm scared of you." The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The elderly couple stopped their quiet conversation. Frank, the cook who was stacking clean plates in the kitchen, paused completely. They all heard it. Elara felt a cold wave wash over her. "Scared of me?" she thought. "He is a giant of a man dressed like a king and he's scared of a tired waitress." I don't know you, Elara stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. I've never seen you before. Victor closed his eyes, squeezing them tight as if trying to erase the image of her face. When he opened them, the terror was still there, but it was now mixed with a desperate, wild kind of panic. He didn't reach for his phone or a weapon. He reached for the edge of the table and pushed himself out of the booth as if the vinyl seat itself had burned him. He was shaking his head, a gesture of pure, unadulterated denial. He was trying to rationalize, to tell himself it was exhaustion or a trick of the light, or a hallucination born of 3 years of relentless mourning. But there was no trick. The woman stood before him, alive and real, embodying his greatest love and his deepest pain. Without a single word, without ordering anything, and without looking at anyone else, Victor Moretti walked out of Maggie's diner. He didn't run, but his pace was hurried, desperate. The bell above the door jangled violently as he passed through, and then he was gone, swallowed by the late-night street. Elara stood rooted to the spot, the menu still clutched in her hand. The only sound in the diner now was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the nervous, shallow breathing of the remaining customers. "Elara, honey, what was that?" asked Mrs. Rodriguez from the booth, her voice trembling. Elara slowly turned to face the kitchen. Frank came out, wiping his hands on a towel. Even he, a man who had seen everything in 30 years of flipping burgers, looked unnerved. "I have no idea," Elara whispered, finally able to breathe again. Her entire body felt weak, but her mind was racing. Why did he look at me like that? She had seen the fear, but underneath it she had also seen something else, something profoundly sad and familiar, like looking into a broken mirror. She knew instinctively that this was not just a weird customer having a bad night. The man carried a dangerous aura, a silent threat that had been momentarily eclipsed by overwhelming shock. He was powerful and he was terrified of her. Elara walked slowly back to the counter, her legs feeling heavy. She placed the menu down gently. It was confusing, terrifying, and deeply unsettling. But as she watched Frank nervously clean a spot that wasn't dirty, a small, stubborn spark ignited inside her. Life had thrown poverty, struggle, and constant uncertainty at Elara. She had survived every single thing so far. She had faced down difficult landlords, abusive bosses, and weeks where she wasn't sure if she could make rent. This strange, powerful, and deeply scared man was just the latest mystery dropped into her lap. Elara reached into her apron pocket, pulled out the small, smooth river stone her mother had given her years ago, and rolled it between her thumb and forefinger, a small habit she had for comfort. She took a deep breath, pushing the fear out of her chest. She didn't know why that dangerous man had looked at her like she was a ghost, but she knew one thing: she was no ghost. She was flesh and blood, a survivor, and she had a shift to finish and rent to pay. Whatever storm that man represented, Elara was ready to stand her ground. She knew life was tough, but deep down, Elara held on to the unwavering belief that goodness and truth always found their way to the surface, even in the darkest corners of the night. She put the stone back in her pocket, gave Frank a reassuring nod, and picked up her cleaning rag. One step at a time, she told herself, a flicker of resilience returning to her tired eyes, knowing that while the night was dark and strange, the morning would bring a chance for answers. The silence in Victor Moretti's penthouse apartment was usually a comfort, a heavy, expensive quiet that spoke of power and solitude. But tonight that silence felt like a cage. Victor wasn't sleeping. Sleep had become a luxury he rarely afforded himself since Alessia died, but tonight, it wasn't grief keeping him awake. It was sheer, impossible terror. He sat in the center of his massive living room, which overlooked the glittering lights of the city, a view that usually gave him a sense of cold control. Tonight the world outside looked mocking, unreal. He was holding the photograph. It was their wedding picture, taken 7 years ago on a sunny day in the hills of Tuscany. The picture showed Alessia, wrapped in simple white silk, her face radiating the kind of pure, uncomplicated joy that had ceased to exist in Victor's world the moment she left it. He had always loved this picture because Alessia's smile was authentic. It wasn't the guarded look most people wore around him. Victor was a man of cold, hard facts. He dealt in evidence, in money trails, in cause and effect. Ghosts, magic, and chance encounters held no place in his precise world. But the woman in that small, run-down diner, Elara, had shattered every single fact he thought he knew. He stared at Alessia's face in the faded photograph, then closed his eyes, conjuring Alara's image. He opened his eyes and looked again. He repeated the ritual over and over, trying to find a flaw, a difference, a tiny curve of the lip or a shadow in the eyes that would prove they were two different people. They were not. They weren't like each other. They were identical. The soft slope of the shoulders, the precise angle of the jawline, even the way the hair fell across the forehead was exactly the same. It was not just the face. It was the light in her hazel eyes, a light he hadn't seen since that horrible day 3 years ago. He remembered whispering, "I'm scared of you." The most dangerous man in the city, the one who orchestrated elaborate chilling plans without blinking, had been reduced to a trembling child in the face of a waitress. Because what he saw wasn't just a resemblance. It was an echo, a defiance of reality itself. He placed the photograph carefully on the marble coffee table, staring at it for a long minute. A deep tremor ran through him, less of fear and more of profound, heartbreaking hope. A hope so vast and unrealistic that it felt dangerous. If this woman, Alara, was alive, then the last 3 years had been a cruel, unnecessary nightmare. But his mind, the mind of the architect, told him the truth. Alessia was dead. He had seen the proof. By 4 a.m. the fear had settled into something colder, something strategic. Victor picked up his phone. He didn't dial a number. He spoke to the empty room, his voice low and gravelly. "I need Marcus," he said, the single word activating the hidden speaker in the room. Within minutes, Marcus, Victor's right-hand man, was standing in the doorway. Marcus was a quiet, unassuming man, not built like a typical bodyguard, but his mind was as sharp and fast as a surgical knife. "The diner on Elm Street," Victor started, not looking at Marcus, still staring at the photograph. "Last night. The waitress. I want everything." Marcus didn't ask a single question. He simply said, "Understood." "Discreet." "More than discreet," Victor said, finally turning, his black eyes fixing on Marcus. "She must not know she is being watched. Not even a whisper of suspicion. If anyone finds out I am interested in her, the consequences will be severe." Marcus left as silently as he arrived, and Victor was left alone again with the photograph and the impossible truth standing beside it. He needed a connection, a sensible line that tied Alara to Alessia. A long-lost sister, a forgotten family secret, anything grounded in reality. The next day felt endless. Victor went through the motions of his empire, sitting in meetings, giving orders and watching deals unfold, but his focus was fractured. All he could see was Alara's shocked face. By the time the moon was high again, Marcus was back. He stood before Victor holding a thin file folder. "The name is Alara Jane Peterson," Marcus reported, his voice flat and efficient. "Age 27. Born and raised in a small town in Alberta, Canada. Moved here 3 years ago. Single, no known family except an elderly maternal aunt in New York. Clean record." Marcus paused, waiting for the expected questions. "What about her family?" Victor asked, his voice low. "Mother died when Alara was young. Father passed away 10 years ago. Both were teachers. No siblings. No known ties to Italy, no ties to any organized crime, no ties to, well, to anyone in our world, Victor." Marcus pushed the folder across the desk. Inside were pictures of Alara growing up. A shy girl in school photos, a young woman graduating from college, and recent photos of her working the diner shift, completely unaware of the eyes on her. It was a life built on struggle and hard work, far away from the dark shadows of the Moretti Empire. "Her entire life is clean, sir," Marcus concluded. "She grew up in a place where the biggest crime is a stolen garden gnome. She is exactly what she appears to be, a hard-working young woman trying to make ends meet." Victor didn't touch the file. He just looked at the photograph of his wife, Alessia, smiling radiantly, and the cold knot in his stomach tightened into absolute terror. If Alara had been a plant, a professional double, an actress hired by an enemy, the file would have been full of holes, forged documents, and quick exits. Victor could have accepted that. He could have dealt with it through strategy and brute force. But the results were clean. Too clean. A perfect double with no connection, no motive, and a life story as ordinary as dirt. That meant Alara was not an enemy operation or a scheme or a trick. She was an anomaly. She was a biological impossibility. She was the woman who shouldn't exist. "Leave the file," Victor commanded, dismissing Marcus with a wave of his hand. He waited until the door clicked shut before slowly reaching for the folder. He flipped through the photos, comparing the image of the diner waitress to the beautiful woman in his wedding portrait. Every time the comparison was maddeningly perfect. He understood danger. He understood betrayal. But he did not understand miracles or fate, or whatever had put Alessia's exact face back on Earth, working a night shift in a random diner. The terrifying thought that took root in his mind was this: if she was not a deception, she had to be a sign. A sign that the world was off balance, that the universe had decided to mess with him, or worse, a sign that the death he had grieved was not the end. Victor stood up, walking over to the immense window. The city lights were sharp and indifferent. He realized his heart was pounding, not with rage or ambition, but with a primitive, chilling dread. "Who are you, Elara Peterson?" he muttered to the glass reflection, seeing his own tormented face staring back. He couldn't leave it alone. The fear of what she represented was overwhelming, but the pull of Alessia's face, the love that was instantly reawakened, was even stronger. He knew what he had to do next. He couldn't send his men, he had to see her again. He had to stand in front of her, this impossible woman, and find the flaw, the crack that proved his wife was gone forever. He took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying his hands. This investigation wasn't about crime or power anymore. It was about the soul of a broken man finding a ghost in the real world. Though the impossibility of the situation brought him close to breaking, a strange, fierce determination settled over him. He was a survivor, and he would uncover this truth, no matter how unbelievable or dangerous it was. He felt a fleeting, faint stirring of the powerful, lost feeling of love mixed with his dread, and knew he wouldn't stop until he understood why fate had given him this second, terrifying glimpse of hope. Elara lived in a modest, old apartment building above a quiet bakery, the kind of place where the scent of baking bread was usually the most dramatic thing that happened all day. Her flat was small but clean, filled with borrowed furniture and the kind of cheap, bright lamps that tried hard to chase away the city shadows. It was Tuesday morning. The air was cool, the traffic just starting to hum, and Elara was already exhausted even before her feet hit the floor. She was running late for a brief second job she picked up cleaning offices before her diner shift started. She had spent the night before tossing and turning, haunted by the image of the terrifying man, Victor Moretti, and the fear in his dark eyes. She pulled on a simple pair of jeans and a sweater, trying to mentally push the encounter aside. It was just a man having a mental breakdown, she told herself. It has nothing to do with me. She grabbed her keys and hurried toward the door. That's when she saw it. Sticking halfway out from beneath the cheap hollow-core wood of her door was a small, folded piece of paper. It looked professional, stiff, and utterly out of place. It wasn't junk mail or a notice from the landlord. It felt dangerous. Elara hesitated, her heart giving a heavy, uncomfortable thump against her ribs. Slowly she bent down and picked it up. The note was typed on heavy, high-quality paper. There was no greeting, no signature. Just two chillingly direct sentences. Stop playing games. Stay away from Victor Moretti, or you will regret more than you can imagine. The simple words hit Elara like a physical punch. She stumbled back a step, leaning against the cold wall. Her mind immediately rejected the idea. Games? She didn't even know the man. She was a waitress, not an actress in some criminal drama. Fear, cold and sharp, wrapped around her. This wasn't a weirdo anymore. This was a warning. And the only reason someone would send her a warning about a powerful, dangerous man was if they knew he was interested in her. She thought back to his face, the shock, the whispered terror. If she was caught in a dangerous power play, she had two choices: run and hide or face the source of the danger head-on. Running meant accepting that her small, peaceful life was over and that she would forever be looking over her shoulder. Elara Jane Peterson wasn't a fighter, but she was a survivor. She was tired of feeling helpless, tired of being a pawn. She balled the note up in her fist, the expensive paper crinkling harshly. She needed answers, and the only person who had them was the man who had caused this mess in the first place. Instead of going to the office job, Elara grabbed her coat. She knew where the Mafia boss's headquarters was, as did everyone in the city. It was a massive, intimidating building downtown, disguised as a financial services firm, but known by everyone as the heart of the Moretti operation. An hour later, Elara stood outside the polished black marble lobby of the Moretti Group building. The place screamed wealth and power. She straightened her posture, pushed down the knot of absolute terror in her stomach and walked in. The security guard, a man built like a concrete wall, stopped her immediately. "May I help you, ma'am?" His tone was polite but firm, the kind that brooked no argument. "I need to see Mr. Moretti," Elara said, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts. The guard almost laughed. "Mr. Moretti does not see appointments without an appointment." Elara took a deep breath, pulling the crumpled note from her pocket and laying it flat on the counter. She pushed it toward the guard. "Tell Mr. Moretti that the waitress from Maggie's diner is here," she said, her voice suddenly finding its conviction. "And tell him she doesn't like being threatened." The guard glanced at the note, his professional face cracking slightly with confusion, then immediately picked up the phone. Within moments, the conversation ended, and the guard was looking at her with a new, strange mixture of suspicion and awe. "Follow me, please," he said. Elara was escorted into an elevator that smelled faintly of leather and power. The tension was almost unbearable. When the doors opened, she was led down a long, quiet corridor and into an office that felt less like a workspace and more like a museum of control. Victor Moretti was standing by a massive window, a glass of water in his hand. He looked tired, his sharp features shadowed by stress, but his presence was as overwhelming as ever. He turned slowly when Elara was shown in, and his reaction was exactly the same as the night in the diner. His body went rigid. The glass almost slipped from his hand. His carefully constructed composure shattered instantly, replaced by the same chilling blend of shock and sorrow. "You shouldn't be here," Victor said, his voice flat and low. He tried to project cold distance, but his eyes were betraying him, drinking in every detail of her face. "I shouldn't exist, is that what you mean?" Elara shot back, stepping closer to his desk. She was small, but she held her ground. "I just found this on my floor. I want to know why a man who doesn't know me is having me watched and why I'm getting threats because of it." She slammed the note down on his polished mahogany desk. Victor didn't look at the note. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it was. The fact that she had received a threat, and then had the sheer guts to walk directly into his office, into the lion's den, was breathtaking. What kind of woman is this? He thought. Alessia had been spirited but reserved. This woman, Elara, was raw courage wrapped up in a diner uniform. Her defiance was startling, and in a way it was intoxicating. It was the first exciting, unpredictable thing that had happened in his life since his wife died. "Take a seat, Elara Peterson," Victor said, forcing his voice to remain calm. He walked around his desk, putting a physical barrier between them. He needed space to think. He needed to manage the powerful, unwelcome storm of emotion she brought with her. "I'm not sitting until you tell me what games I'm playing," Elara insisted, folding her arms. "I just serve food. I want my life back." Victor looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the genuine panic beneath the anger. He saw a woman who was definitely not an actress or a plant. That only deepened the mystery and his fear. "I have not sent anyone to threaten you," Victor stated firmly. "And I certainly haven't had you watched long enough for anyone to get ahead of me." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Last night when I saw you, it was a shock. A very personal shock. I asked my people to find out who you were. That's all." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "The person who sent you this note is not working for me. This means someone else saw me react to you. Someone else knows about you now. And that," he finished, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper, "is a far bigger problem for both of us." Elara's anger faltered. The truth in his eyes was undeniable. He hadn't threatened her, and his fear now seemed to be for her too. He was telling her that a third party, someone even more dangerous, was now watching the impossible connection between them. The shock of her appearance had done two things. It had momentarily blinded Victor, and it had tipped off someone else in the shadows. Victor walked around the desk, stopping about 6 feet from her. He was trying to push her away, both for his emotional safety and her physical one. "Go home, Elara," he ordered, his voice laced with forced severity. "Forget you saw me. Forget this note. Go back to your diner. The more distance you put between yourself and me, the safer you will be." He didn't want her here. He couldn't handle her presence. The way she looked, the memory she brought, the hope she awakened. But Elara, though scared, saw the slight flicker of concern in his black eyes. She realized this man, who was supposed to be a monster, was genuinely worried for her and genuinely confused by her existence. "I can't just forget a death threat, Mr. Moretti," she said softly. "I don't play games. But I don't run from a fight either. Whatever is happening, I'm already in it, aren't I?" Victor simply nodded, a slow, grudging admission. "It appears you are." He looked at the small, courageous woman standing defiantly in his immense office and felt a confusing surge of admiration and dread. He couldn't deny her existence, he couldn't deny the danger. But he also knew he couldn't let his enemies use her as a weapon. "Go home for now," Victor repeated, less of an order this time and more of a plea. "I will find out who sent that note. Until then, you are under my protection." Ilara looked from the threatening note on the desk to the imposing man who had just promised to protect her. A mafia boss. It was crazy. Her life had gone from waiting tables to needing protection from a criminal enterprise, all because she happened to share a face with a dead woman. Yet somehow standing there facing him, she felt a strange flicker of relief. This powerful man, for whatever terrifying reason, was now invested in her survival. She gave a small, resolute nod. "I'll be at the diner." As she turned and walked toward the door, leaving the silent, anxious Victor in his powerful, lonely office, she felt the fear receding, replaced by a fierce sense of self-preservation. She knew she was in deep trouble, but she also knew she wasn't alone anymore. This was terrifying, but this was her life now. She would face it. She would demand justice. And perhaps against all odds she would find the truth behind the face she wore. When Ilara left the cold, marble cage of the Moretti headquarters, she didn't feel safe, but she felt active. The terrible confusion of the last few days had been replaced by a fierce, urgent need for answers. She hadn't gone back to the diner. She drove straight to New York, to the tiny, sun-drenched apartment of her elderly maternal Aunt Clara. Aunt Clara lived in a quiet corner of Brooklyn, a place full of old books, comforting clutter, and the smell of cinnamon. Clara was a gentle soul, a woman whose life was built around small acts of kindness and unwavering routine. She was thin and fragile, with spectacles perched low on her nose, and she worried about everything, especially Ilara. Ilara found her aunt sitting in her favorite armchair, knitting a massive, brightly colored scarf that seemed to have no end. "Ilara, honey, what a lovely surprise!" Clara cried, dropping her needles in excitement. "You didn't call. Are you well? Did you eat on the drive?" Ilara hugged her aunt tightly, drawing strength from the familiar, comforting scent of lavender. She knew she couldn't tell Claire about the mafia boss or the death threat. It would terrify her beyond measure. But she had to ask about her past. They sat down and Ilara accepted a cup of warm tea. She took a moment, watching the steam curl up, trying to find the right, simple words for a complicated question. "Aunt Clara," Ilara began, keeping her voice light, "I know Mom and Dad were wonderful and I know I was their real daughter. But I was thinking about my past. You know, before I was 5. Clara stiffened slightly and the motion was immediate and telling. Her hands, which had been resting peacefully in her lap, began to fiddle nervously with the edge of the tea coaster. "What about before 5, dear?" Clara asked, avoiding her niece's gaze. I realized I don't remember much. And sometimes people say I don't look much like Mom or Dad. Was I adopted very late? Did my birth parents maybe have other kids?" Ilara pressed, keeping her tone curious, not accusing. Clara sighed, a sound heavy with years of unspoken secrets. She looked at Ilara, her loving eyes filled with a deep, sad conflict. Clara had promised her sister, Ilara's adopted mother, she would keep this secret forever. But now, looking at the tired lines around Ilara's beautiful, familiar eyes, she knew the time for secrets was over. "Oh, my dearest girl," Clara whispered, reaching across the small table to cover Ilara's hand with her own. "I was told I should never, ever talk about this. But you deserve the truth, especially now you're an adult and forging your own way." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "You were adopted, yes, but not as a baby. You came to your mother and father when you were 5 years old, almost 6. You arrived with hardly anything, a little suitcase and some very peculiar documents." Ilara felt a dizzying drop in her stomach. 5 years old. That was a childhood already built, a history erased. The gap in her memory wasn't normal. It was a wall built by adoption. "But why 5? Ilara asked, her voice barely audible. "And where were the documents?" Clara slowly rose and went to a small, heavy wooden chest in the corner of the room, A piece of furniture Alara had seen 100 times and always assumed held old blankets. Clara fumbled with a tiny key on a chain around her neck, unlocking the chest with a low wooden creak. She pulled out a thick manila envelope, yellowed with age. When your parents adopted you, there was a lot of paperwork. Very strange, quick paperwork, Clara explained, her voice low. Your parents were told explicitly by the agency that your original birth certificate and adoption file were sealed for your protection. They were told the names of your birth parents were too dangerous to know, that you were related to a family caught in a legal mess, and that if those names were ever revealed you could be in danger. She handed the sealed envelope to Alara. They were told to forget your first 5 years, and that the new identity, Alara Jane Peterson, was for your safety. Alara took the envelope. It felt heavy, final, and terrifyingly real. The words, sealed for safety, echoed the threat she had received under her door. It wasn't just a simple adoption. It was a deliberate, complicated hiding. The innocent confusion of the last few days evaporated instantly, replaced by crushing uncertainty. The resemblance to Victor Moretti's dead wife wasn't just a bizarre coincidence anymore. It was suddenly connected to a hidden, dangerous past. Was she Alessia's sister? Cousin? Or something even more complicated? I don't even know who I am, Alara whispered, the tears finally springing to her eyes. My entire life is built on a lie meant to protect me. Clara hugged her close. No, my darling girl. Your life is built on the love of your mother and father. The lie was only the start. The love was the truth. Meanwhile, miles away, back in the city, Victor was receiving an update from a source he had placed to monitor Alara's apartment building. The source reported Alara's sudden, unexplained trip to New York to see her aunt, and the timing was suspicious. Victor, cloistered in his darkened office, was piecing together the few details he had. The perfect double, the death threat from an unknown third party, and now a sudden trip to retrieve secret family history. He looked again at Alessia's picture. He immediately ordered Marcus to dig deeper into the adoption records, not through legal channels which were dead ends, but through the dark web of old, corrupted state records. It took Marcus less than an hour to come back with a chilling fragment of information. Victor, the official file on Alara Peterson is rock solid, but I found an old, unauthorized internal memo from the agency. It's heavily encrypted and incomplete, Marcus said, laying a single piece of paper on the desk. Victor read the fragment. It was a single line of cryptic code, but the translated note spoke of an emergency placement of Asset 1.2, and a reference to a recent event in Rome. Rome. That was where Alessia had spent the last 3 months of her life, and where the accident that killed her had supposedly taken place. Victor gripped the edge of the desk. The fear he had felt in the diner was gone, replaced by a terrible, cold certainty. This is not a coincidence, Victor stated, his voice a low, fierce growl. Alara is not just a double. She is linked to Rome. She is linked to Alessia. He remembered Alessia's death. It had always felt too clean, too simple for the complicated woman she was. He had mourned the accident, but deep down, the architect had always suspected a hidden, complex design. The sealed documents, the safety, Victor muttered, standing up and pacing the immense room. Someone took a 5-year-old girl and gave her a new life to hide her from the fallout of what happened to Alessia. This changed everything. Alara wasn't just a ghost of his past. She was the key to unlocking the secret that killed his wife. The mystery now wasn't whether Alara was connected to Alessia, but how, and why someone had gone to such extreme lengths to hide her. The fact that Alara, completely innocent, was now digging into her past meant she was unwittingly exposing herself to the same danger that had necessitated her being hidden in the first place. And the fact that someone had sent her a threat meant that the forces that tried to erase her history were still very much alive. Victor felt the storm brewing. It wasn't just emotional chaos anymore. It was a deadly, real-world conflict. He had to get to Alara before the people who had sealed her past identity did. He picked up the phone. Marcus, he commanded, his voice sharp and focused. Get a team to New York. Do not approach her. Just watch the aunt's place. And get me everything, every whisper about what happened in Rome 3 years ago that wasn't on the police reports. Victor looked out the window at the dark city, his powerful hands clenched. The sadness was still there, but now it was fueled by purpose. He needed to protect Alara not just because she looked like his dead wife, but because she might be the last, living connection to the truth. And if he had learned one thing in his ruthless life, it was that love and justice often required breaking all the rules. He would find out who Alara really was, and he would protect her from the shadows that had been haunting her since childhood. He was a ruthless man, but he was also a man deeply in love, and this time he would fight to win the truth and maybe a little piece of the hope he thought he had lost forever. It was a cold, rainy evening, the kind of night that usually meant slow business at Maggie's diner. Alara was back at work. After the gut-wrenching realization that her entire past was a lie hidden for safety, she needed the grounding reality of her routine. The clatter of plates, the smell of burnt toast, the simple rhythm of serving coffee. She still had the sealed envelope from Aunt Clara tucked away safely. She felt fragile, but her resolve was steel. She was still Alara Peterson, the hard-working girl from the small town, and she wasn't going to let a deadly family secret stop her from earning her keep. What she didn't know was that tonight, Maggie's diner wasn't serving just comfort food. It was serving as the unlikely meeting ground for the two most dangerous men in the city. Viktor Moretti had arranged a low-key meeting with his rival Sergei Volkov, an ambitious, unpredictable Russian mob boss. Volkov had been pushing hard into Moretti territory, and Viktor wanted to end the conflict quickly, quietly, and firmly. The diner was Viktor's choice, a neutral ground, discreet and public enough to discourage overt violence. Viktor arrived first, taking a booth in the corner, his usual position of guarded power. He wore a simple dark coat, but the authority radiating off him could not be hidden. He watched the door, waiting for Volkov, but his eyes kept flicking to Alara as she moved through the aisles. He hadn't stopped thinking about the adoption secret, the Rome connection, and the urgent need to protect this impossible woman. When Sergei Volkov walked in, the atmosphere changed instantly, crackling with barely contained aggression. Volkov was younger than Viktor, built like a cage fighter with ice-blue eyes that missed nothing. He was arrogant and prone to dramatic displays of brutality. Sergei slid into the booth opposite Viktor, and the two men began their deadly whispered negotiation over lukewarm coffee. Alara, unaware of the explosive cargo she was carrying, approached their table, balancing a small tray. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" she asked politely, her voice neutral. Sergei Volkov stopped mid-sentence. His eyes, fixed on Viktor, suddenly darted sideways to look at the waitress. His face, usually a mask of menacing confidence, drained of all color so completely that the pale man looked truly spectral. The blood seemed to leave his features entirely. He didn't just freeze, he jerked back against the vinyl seat, nearly knocking over his coffee cup. "No," Volkov breathed out, his voice choked, a desperate whisper of disbelief. He was staring at Alara with an intensity far greater than Viktor had shown on the first night. Volkov knew Alessia well. He had attended her funeral. And unlike Viktor, who loved her deeply, Volkov was driven by a dark, superstitious fear of her. He had always believed Alessia was a jinx, a catalyst for bad luck, and he had been relieved when she died. Now standing before him was her absolute living double. "You," Volkov rasped, pointing a shaking finger at Alara. The subtle, deadly tension between the two mob bosses instantly shifted entirely to Alara. "I'm sorry, sir?" Alara asked, confused and instantly alarmed by the sheer, naked fear on his face. This was worse than Viktor's reaction. This man looked like he was confronting a terrifying, ancient prophecy. Volkov turned his burning blue gaze to Viktor. "The ghost wife," he hissed, the words laced with profound dread. "Moretti, what is this madness? Is this some trick? Did you bring her back to curse us all?" Viktor's face was cold granite. He had anticipated many reactions from Volkov, but not this raw panic. He immediately understood that Volkov had known Alessia's death was tied to something larger and that Alara's appearance confirmed Volkov's worst fears. "Step away from the table, Alara," Viktor ordered sharply, switching instantly into command mode. But Volkov was too far gone in his terror. For him, seeing Alara meant history was about to repeat itself. A history that had almost ruined him the first time. He couldn't risk it. He believed eliminating her was the only way to safeguard his future. In a move of startling, animalistic speed, Volkov lunged out of the booth. He grabbed Alara's wrist, his fingers clamping down with crushing force. "You won't curse me again." Volkov snarled, already pulling her toward the exit, dragging her past the counter in a terrifying blur of motion. "I will stop history now." Alara screamed, a sharp, pure sound of shock and terror. She dropped her tray. The plates shattered loudly on the tiled floor, the noise echoing like a gunshot. The few customers scattered in horror. Before Volkov could take 2 steps toward the door, Victor Moretti moved. Victor was older, but he was lethal. He vaulted over the table with terrifying speed, ignoring the chairs that crashed down behind him. He didn't waste time on threats. He delivered a single focused, brutal blow. A heavy right hook that connected with the side of Volkov's jaw with the sickening force of a hammer hitting rock. Sergei Volkov stumbled, momentarily stunned, his grip on Ilara loosening. Ilara instantly yanked her arm free, scrambling away toward the safety of the counter. "Get down!" Victor roared at her, his usual controlled voice completely gone, replaced by the primitive sound of a man fighting for something essential. Volkov recovered quickly, spitting blood onto the floor. He drew a small, heavy piece of metal from his coat, not a gun but a knuckle duster designed for maximum damage in a close fight. The quiet, comforting diner was instantly transformed into a battlefield. Victor dodged a sweeping blow that would have shattered his ribs and countered with a blinding series of strikes, precise, professional, and devastating. He was fighting with a chilling intensity, driven by the knowledge that Volkov, who saw Ilara as a supernatural threat, would not stop until she was dead. Ilara, crouching behind the counter, watched in horrified silence. The difference between the 2 men was immense. Volkov was fighting like a mad dog, fueled by fear. Victor was fighting like a machine built for efficiency, fueled by a terrifying resurgence of his deepest love and the fierce need for justice. Within 30 seconds the fight was over. Victor pinned Volkov brutally against the wall, his arm pressed tight across the rival boss's throat. "You touch her," Victor hissed into Volkov's ear, his breath tight and cold, "and I will erase everything you have ever built. Your terror is the key, Sergei. You just admitted there is a secret, and now I will find out what it is. And you will be the first one to pay." He shoved Volkov away with tremendous force. "Get out. If I see your face again, you die." Volkov, coughing and bruised, glanced one last horrified look at Ilara, the woman who shouldn't exist, then stumbled out of the shattered door and into the pouring rain. The diner was silent again, but the quiet was now thick with adrenaline, fear, and the smell of blood. Victor turned immediately to Ilara. She was still trembling, clutching her raw wrist. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, walking toward her. He looked terrifying, his hair slightly disheveled, his coat torn, the cold fury still burning in his dark eyes. "No," Ilara whispered, shaking her head. I'm fine." Victor ran a hand through his hair, regaining his control with visible effort. The chaos of the moment had stripped away his composure and his carefully maintained distance. He was overwhelmed not just by the fight, but by the sheer, undeniable fact that he had risked everything, his life, his empire, to protect a woman he barely knew, simply because she wore the face of his dead wife. The threat was real. The secret was deadly. And now the war for her life had begun. "You heard him," Victor said, his voice flat with finality. "He thinks you are a ghost. He tried to kill you to stop history from repeating. Whatever secret is in that envelope your aunt gave you, it is deadly. You are not safe here, Ilara." He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her small frame. He looked down at her, the woman who was both his greatest love and his greatest fear. "I can't send my men to watch you anymore," he said, the words heavy with resignation. "Volkov knows about you. He will send everyone. You're coming with me. Now." Ilara looked up at him. She was terrified of the violence, terrified of the threat, and terrified of the man standing over her who had just risked his life to save her. She knew she should say no, that getting into a car with a mafia boss was a foolish, reckless move. But she also realized something else. He was her only shield against a world that clearly wanted her dead for reasons she still didn't understand. She saw the genuine, conflicted pain in his eyes. "To your headquarters?" she asked, her voice steadying. "To a safe house," Victor corrected. "Somewhere no one, not even my closest people, knows about. You are under my protection, Ilara. Against everyone. Including myself." Ilara looked at the shattered plates, the overturned chairs, and the fear in her boss, Frank, who was hiding near the kitchen. She knew her life here was over. The violence and the secret had found her. She took a deep breath, pushing down the terror, and felt the fierce, stubborn hope rising inside her again. She was stepping into the darkness, but she was going toward the truth. She nodded slowly. "All right, Victor. she said, using his first name for the first time. Let's go find out why I shouldn't exist. Victor looked at the sheer bravery in her eyes, the mirror image of the fierce spirit he had loved, and a profound aching tenderness washed over his dread. He had fought hard to keep her at a distance, to avoid the emotional ruin she represented. But in saving her life he had lost the fight with his own heart. He would protect her, he swore, and he would find the truth. He reached out not to grab her but to offer a steadying hand. As she took it, a tiny, fragile spark of hope, amidst the wreckage and the danger, finally ignited between them. The journey from the chaotic wreckage of Maggie's diner to the cold, quiet sanctuary of Victor Moretti's private retreat was a blur for Alara. She sat rigidly in the back of a luxury SUV, the speed and darkness amplifying her terror. She was now under the protection of the very man she had been warned to avoid, all because a rival boss recognized her face and tried to kill her. The safe house turned out to be less of a house and more of an immense, heavily fortified mansion set far outside the city. It was beautiful but silent, radiating the kind of stark isolation that only extreme wealth and danger could buy. Victor didn't waste time. He bypassed the living areas entirely and led Alara down a discreet staircase hidden behind a mahogany library wall. The air immediately grew cooler, heavier, and completely silent. They were descending into the heart of his secret world. The staircase ended before a massive circular steel door, a proper bank vault. "This is where I keep my deepest secrets," Victor said, his voice echoing slightly in the cold space. He didn't look at her, focusing intently on the complex digital lock. "Everything here is about Alessia." Alara watched as the heavy tumblers shifted inside the door with a loud, mechanical thunk. The door hissed open, revealing a small, brightly lit room lined floor to ceiling with locked cabinets and fireproof boxes. This wasn't a room for money or jewelry. It was a mausoleum of unsolved grief. "This is the basement of truth," Alara whispered, finally understanding the depth of Victor's obsession. Victor led her to a large, clear desk in the center of the room. On it were several stacks of organized files, transcripts, and photos. "My wife, Alessia Moretti," Victor began, his voice devoid of emotion, like a narrator reading a police report. "She died 3 years ago in Rome. The official report said it was a car accident on a winding mountain road. But the architect doesn't believe in accidents." He gestured to the files. "Every lead, every witness interview, every piece of paper that didn't make it into the official police file is here. I want you to read through the files of her childhood and early life. Focus on anything before she met me. Focus on the first 5 years." Alara sat down, her hands shaking slightly. This was the moment of truth. She picked up the first folder. Alessia Moretti, Early Life. The files detailed a life of privilege and privacy, but as Alara read, she began to find strange, small moments that resonated deep inside her, touching the forgotten corners of her own sealed childhood. Description of childhood home. A large Italian villa near the sea. Alara looked at a blurry photograph of the stone porch and felt a sudden sharp ache of familiarity. She remembered playing with pebbles there, the warm, rough texture under her small hands. A memory she had always thought was a dream suddenly felt real. Favorite toy. A small wooden toy cat hand-carved. Alara's breath hitched. She remembered hiding that exact little wooden cat in her sock drawer when she was first adopted, and crying when she couldn't find it later. She thought she had invented the memory. Childhood nickname, Piccola Stella, Little Star. Alara instinctively looked down. Her adoptive mother had always called her Star, and Alara had never understood why until now. It wasn't a simple name, it was a translation of a deeply personal nickname. Alara's mind raced. These weren't coincidences. These were direct echoes. The details she was reading, small, intimate memories that no one but the subject and a very close family member could possibly share, were crossing the divide between Alessia's dead past and Alara's hidden past. She looked at the official birth certificate of Alessia Moretti, noting the date and location. It lined up perfectly with the time she had been adopted and sealed away in Canada. "Victor," Alara said, her voice shaking, "this isn't just a resemblance. I remember the stone porch. I remember the little wooden cat. I remember being called Piccola Stella." Victor had been standing across the room, maintaining a physical and emotional distance, watching her like a hawk watches a bird, ready to strike but terrified of what he might find. When she spoke those words, he physically flinched. He walked slowly toward the desk, his imposing figure casting a huge shadow. He looked down at the documents, then at Alara's face, her eyes wide with fear and discovery. "You cannot remember those things," Victor said, his voice strained, raw with denial. "You were adopted at 5. Your memories were suppressed. These are just coincidences fueled by trauma." "No," Alara insisted, pushing the files away. She looked at him with a desperate plea for understanding. "They told me the original documents were sealed for safety. What if I wasn't adopted because I was a sister or a cousin? What if I was adopted because I am Alessia, and someone wanted the real her erased and hidden?" The terrifying, impossible thought was now out in the open. Victor's mind, the rational, controlling mind of the architect, seized up completely. The thought was absurd. Alessia was dead. He had seen the body, identified her remains, held her funeral. He had lived 3 years in a pit of grief and certainty. But the woman in front of him, claiming memories of his wife's childhood, looked exactly like the woman he loved. What if she is? The question, once just a terrifying notion, now felt like a heavy, cold hand gripping his heart. What if Alessia hadn't died? What if the accident was a staged disappearance? What if she had suffered some extreme trauma, lost her memory, and was planted somewhere safe by someone, perhaps a loyal ally or a desperate family member, to be hidden from the very forces that had tried to kill her? If Alara truly was Alessia with memory loss, then the love he had buried would rise again, whole and complete. It was a staggering, unbearable thought. "Stop," Victor commanded, his voice sharp with pain. He grabbed her arm, not violently but tightly, desperately. "Stop saying that. Alessia is gone. You are Alara Peterson." He was terrified not of the enemies outside the vault, but of the woman in his hands. If she was Alessia, then his entire identity, his grief, his revenge, his solitude, was a lie. If she was Alessia, then she had been alive all this time, suffering alone. "I am showing you the files so we can find the connection, the twin, the sister," he continued, struggling to impose logic on the madness. "Not so you can claim to be my dead wife." Alara pulled her arm gently from his grasp. She saw the genuine terror in his eyes, the deep-seated resistance to hope. He was a man fighting tooth and nail against a miracle. "You're scared I might be her because then you have to admit that the last 3 years of your life, the loneliness, the grief, it was all unnecessary," Alara stated softly, her empathy cutting through the tension. "You're scared of the hope, Victor." Her words were simple, relatable, and devastatingly true. He was terrified of the hope. It was a weakness he couldn't afford. Victor turned away sharply, walking to the far end of the vault. He needed distance from the powerful, impossible truth. He looked at the files detailing Alessia's accident in Rome. He had always focused on the conspiracy to kill her, never the possibility of a conspiracy to hide her. He realized the next step was not to search for a hidden relative, but to search for the doctors, the witnesses, the official who certified her death. He needed proof that the body he identified 3 years ago was not his wife. He turned back to Alara, his face a mask of complex, conflicting emotions. "We stop reading files now," Victor declared, his voice firm. "Until I know who you are, this vault is your sanctuary, and the truth, whatever it is, will remain hidden." He knew he couldn't push her away anymore, not with the enemies closing in and the secrets exposed. He walked toward her, and this time there was no hostility, only a fierce, protective resolve. "You will stay here, Alara," he said. "I will bring you everything you need. I will find the truth about Rome. And I promise you this. Whether you are Alara Peterson or Alessia Moretti, I will protect you from the people who sealed your life away." Alara looked up at the terrifying, conflicted man who was fighting his own heart to save her. She knew she was in the darkest place imaginable, a Mafia vault with a man running from his own ghost. But as Victor placed a powerful, reassuring hand on her shoulder, she felt a profound sense of safety. She was terrified of the possibility of being a dead woman brought back to life, but she knew that this journey toward the truth, guided by this complex, grieving man, was the only way forward. She looked at the stacks of documents, now symbols of both the danger and the possibility of a powerful, recovered love, and found a small, brave smile. She would face the truth, whatever it was, because she finally felt like she was fighting for herself. 2 days passed in the sterile quiet of the Moretti mansion. Alara remained confined to the vault area, surrounded by the physical evidence of Alessia's life. Victor, meanwhile, had thrown his full resources into investigating the official death certificate from Rome. He hadn't slept, fueled by coffee and the impossible hope that Alara had awakened. He was in his library, staring blankly at a complex financial ledger, when his security detail sent up a strange notification. "Mr. Moretti," the voice crackled over the intercom, "there is an elderly gentleman here demanding to see you. He claims he knows Alara Peterson from when she was a child. He says it's urgent and related to your wife." Victor's body went rigid. This was too specific, too perfectly timed. He hadn't invited anyone. If this was a trap, it was a subtle one. But the mention of Alara's childhood was a lure he couldn't resist. "Send him to the sitting room," Victor commanded. "And triple the perimeter security. Marcus, you will be in the room." The visitor, Dr. Alistair Finch, was exactly the kind of man you'd trust with your secrets. He was tall but stooped with age, wearing an old tweed coat that smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and clean linen. His face was kind, lined with years of quiet observation, and his hands, though wrinkled, were steady. He looked utterly out of place in Victor's intimidating mansion. Dr. Finch sat nervously on the edge of a vast velvet sofa, sipping a cup of herbal tea. Marcus stood silently by the door, a heavy, unmoving presence. Victor entered the room and wasted no time on pleasantries. "You claim to know Alara Peterson," Victor stated, his voice low and dangerous. "Identify yourself and explain your presence." Dr. Finch placed his teacup down carefully. "My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. I was a family doctor in the small town of Alara's adoption in Alberta. I was close with the Petersons. And yes, I know Alara. Or rather, I knew her." He looked directly at Victor, his kind eyes steady. "I saw the news about the incident at the diner, and I saw the photo of the man who attacked her. Sergei Volkov. And I knew the danger had finally caught up to her." Victor leaned forward, every muscle tense. "Danger? Explain." "When Alara was 5, the doctor began, his voice dropping slightly, "she was brought to me by her adoptive parents. She was traumatized. Not physically but mentally. Her memories were almost completely gone. We tried everything, but the trauma was profound. It was related to a horrific accident. A fire, as I recall, though the details were always murky." He paused, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. She had survived a devastating house fire. The shock was so severe it caused what we medically call dissociative amnesia. Essentially, her brain shut down her past to protect her present. Alara's hidden past, the blank canvas before age 5, was not just an adoption secret. It was a scar left by a fire and trauma-induced memory loss. This perfectly explained why she had only fragmentary, dreamlike memories matching Alessia's childhood. "A fire," Victor repeated softly. He was trying to reconcile the image of his spirited wife with a 5-year-old girl pulled from the flames. "Yes. But here is where it gets complicated, Mr. Moretti," Dr. Finch continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "The Petersons were told that her original identity was dangerous. They were also instructed quite forcefully to never try to restore her memories, and to never speak of her adoption past. They followed those rules religiously. I suspect Alara breaking those rules by investigating her adoption is what led that brute Volkov right to her." "Who gave those instructions?" Victor demanded. "Who paid you to keep the silence?" Dr. Finch smiled sadly. "Ah, Mr. Moretti. I was a quiet, poor country doctor. An envelope full of cash arrived with her files, along with very specific instructions from a discreet, high-powered lawyer in Europe. The lawyer represented a concerned family member, who wanted the child's life completely erased for her safety." He watched Victor's face intently. "I don't know the name of the family member, but I can tell you this. The lawyer who handled the paperwork and the cash was from a very specific old-school European law firm. A firm that specializes in handling sensitive assets for noble old families." Dr. Finch's words hung in the air. Old families. Victor's mind instantly flashed back to his early days with Alessia. When he had first met her, she was secretive about her life before him. She eventually confessed to him that her childhood, though aristocratic, had been overshadowed by a hidden, persistent danger. A threat from within her own powerful, old-money Italian family that she had only escaped by running away and creating a new life. She had told him stories of how years before she met him she had been briefly disappeared, for her own safety by a trusted family ally, only to reappear later under a new name, ready to rebuild her life. She had never given him the full details, saying only that the family member who saved her was a master of disguise and evasion. Victor stood up, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The disappearance, he muttered to himself. Before she met me. Her escape from her family's danger. If Alessia had been hidden once before she even met Victor, then the idea of her being hidden again, and taking her young relative Alara with her, suddenly made chilling perfect sense. Victor looked at the doctor, his eyes sharp and focused. The resemblance between Alara and Alessia, it's beyond genetics. Were they twins? Dr. Finch shook his head. No, Mr. Moretti. But there are families, old bloodlines, where the resemblance across generations is profound. I never knew the family name, but the lawyer referred to the child as Alessia's final legacy. A strange word for a doctor to hear about a living girl. Final legacy. Victor knew what that meant. Alessia must have been pregnant when she orchestrated her own disappearance from her family's grasp, and she must have left the child with someone she trusted, only to have that child, Alara, suffer the memory-wiping fire years later. But if Alara was a daughter or a niece, then the conspiracy was even deeper than he imagined. It meant Alessia had been carrying secrets and dangers long before she married him. He looked at Dr. Finch, his resolve hardening. You risked everything to come here. Why? The old doctor stood up, adjusting his coat. I made a promise to the Petersons to protect Alara's safety. Now that Volkov has seen her, the past is coming for her. I wanted you to know she is innocent. Her past is a blank page of survival, not deception. And I needed to warn you. The person who saved her the first time is a master of hiding. They are probably watching you both right now. With a final, meaningful look, Dr. Finch was escorted out, leaving Victor alone with the impossible truth. Victor walked swiftly down to the vault. Alara was sitting quietly, surrounded by the evidence of Alessia's life. He walked over to the desk and placed a comforting hand on Alara's shoulder. I know why you have those memories, Piccola Stella, Victor said, using the childhood name she had rediscovered. Alara looked up at him, her eyes bright with sudden hope and terror. You were in a fire when you were 5, he explained gently. A tragedy that wiped your memory. But that fire and your subsequent hiding was arranged by the same powerful, mysterious person who protected Alessia years ago. You are not my dead wife, Alara. But you are related to her. Very closely. And whatever secret she died to protect is now tied to you. Alara's relief at not being a ghost was instantly replaced by the terrifying realization that she was an orphan of a deadly family conspiracy. She was the final piece of Alessia's puzzle. Victor knelt beside her, his powerful hand covering hers. The fire explains the memory loss. The powerful protector explains the sealed adoption. But it doesn't explain how Volkov found you. We have to find out what happened in Rome, and we have to find the person who saved you once before, because they are the key to saving you now. He looked at her with a fierce, protective love. A love for the past woman mixed with a fierce new protectiveness for the present woman. He was a man with a singular focus on justice, and he wouldn't rest until he uncovered the full truth of Alessia's final legacy. He knew this was the darkest, most dangerous investigation of his life, but holding Alara's hand, he also knew it was the most important. The revelation from Dr. Finch, that Alara was a relative hidden by trauma and secrecy, had given Victor a temporary, rational explanation for the impossible resemblance. It was a lie that allowed him to breathe. But the architect in him demanded certainty, not just comfort. While Alara remained secure in the vault, poring over the documents and connecting the painful, fragmented dots of her memory to Alessia's life, Victor had taken a necessary, cold-blooded step. He arranged for a discreet sample of Alara's DNA to be collected. He didn't tell her. The potential truth was too explosive. Victor still possessed vials of Alessia's blood, stored years ago when she underwent a minor surgery. He had quietly sent both samples, Alara's and Alessia's, to a highly specialized, anonymous lab in Switzerland, using burner channels and false names. He expected the results to confirm Dr. Finch's theory. A sister, a cousin, maybe a child, a high percentage match but not identical. The results arrived precisely at midnight 2 days later, delivered via an encrypted digital message. Victor was alone in his office, the city lights below him mirroring the anxious, scattered thoughts in his mind. He opened the file attachment, his hands usually rock-steady, feeling oddly heavy. He scanned the first few lines of the complex molecular data, looking for the telltale signs of a close familial match. He didn't find them. Instead, the final summary line, bolded and circled by the technician, jumped out at him, a scientific declaration of the impossible. Conclusion: samples exhibit a 99.9% probability of belonging to the same individual. Victor froze. The world outside his window seemed to tilt. Same individual. The lab wasn't suggesting they were twins or even parent/child. They were suggesting the DNA was a perfect, identical match. The kind of result one gets when comparing a person's saliva to their own stored blood. He dismissed the result instantly. A contamination. A forgery. A laboratory error. He called the technician immediately via the secured line. The man on the other end, a brilliant but detached scientist named Dr. Keller, was clearly shaken. "Mr. Moretti, sir, the results are unprecedented," Keller stated, his voice tight with professional anxiety. "We ran the test 3 times. We compared the mitochondrial DNA, the Y chromosomes, everything. The samples are identical. We had to conclude the possibility of contamination, but given the rigorous separation and coding you insisted upon, the more alarming conclusion is this. The person whose blood was stored 3 years ago and the woman you sampled now are, genetically speaking, one and the same." Keller paused, lowering his voice. "Sir, either your initial sample was compromised or the woman you have is a clone, which is absurd, or she is the original subject and the death 3 years ago was highly orchestrated." Victor ended the call abruptly, his mind reeling. 99.9% match. The cold, hard facts he had always relied on were fighting a brutal war with the hope that had begun to blossom in his heart. If the DNA was correct, then Alara was not Alessia's relative. Alara was Alessia. The fire, the memory loss, the sealed adoption, it all pointed to a colossal conspiracy to protect his wife, a conspiracy that had lasted 3 long, agonizing years. The grief he had carried, the revenge he had plotted, the emptiness of his life, it was all based on a lie. His wife had suffered amnesia and was hidden away by a brilliant protector, only to be found by him in a small diner. The emotional storm that revelation brought was overwhelming, a mixture of ecstatic, blinding joy and crushing, throat-tightening rage. He wanted to rush down to the vault and hold her, to tell her that the past wasn't erased, just sealed. But before he could act, his private intercom buzzed. It was Marcus. "Victor, the council is arriving. They didn't call ahead. They are requesting an immediate emergency meeting." The council, the shadowy group of old, powerful leaders who governed the Moretti Empire, rarely met in person and never without warning. This was bad. Victor quickly encrypted and hid the DNA report, his immediate focus shifting from emotional crisis to political survival. He descended to the main floor to meet the 3 grim-faced men of the council. They settled in the formal meeting room, the atmosphere cold and critical. "Victor," began the eldest member, Dario, his voice heavy with implied judgment. "Word travels. Your skirmish in the diner with Volkov was unnecessary. Worse, it was emotional. And the reason for it, that waitress." Another member, Enzo, leaned forward, his face etched with disapproval. "The council is concerned. That woman, that ghost, is a distraction. She has now drawn the attention of Volkov and, worse, the attention of those old European families who wish to destabilize us. They see her face and they see weakness." Dario finished the attack. "Your obsession with this resemblance is putting the entire family at risk. We demand that you sever all ties with Alara Peterson. She must disappear. For the good of the organization." Victor felt a cold, furious heat rising in his chest. They were demanding he eliminate the woman who might be his beloved wife. His Mafia duties, his life's work, were now standing in direct, deadly opposition to the truth and the one person he truly loved. He kept his face a blank, unreadable mask, channeling the cold authority of the architect. "Alara Peterson is not a distraction," Victor stated, his voice hard as steel. "She is a key. Volkov's terror proves that she is directly connected to the hidden conflict that threatened Alessia's life before she died. Eliminating her means destroying the only way we have of uncovering that threat before it strikes us again." He stood up, walking to the head of the table, projecting dominance. "I did not bring her here for pleasure. I brought her here as a strategic asset. She is under my protection until I extract every last piece of truth from her situation. When I am finished, she will be released and the problem will be resolved. Until then, you will speak of her to no one." The council members looked uneasy but backed down slightly under the weight of his conviction and authority. "Very well, Victor," Dario conceded stiffly. "You have 30 days. Resolve this. If this strategic asset causes any further instability, we will intervene and the decision will be final." With that chilling ultimatum delivered, the council left, their presence leaving the room feeling heavy and toxic. Victor stood alone in the silence, his powerful exterior finally cracking. He was trapped between an impossible truth and a deadly demand. He had to keep Alara alive and hidden, yet he couldn't afford to admit that the woman he was protecting wasn't just a relative, but the woman he had sworn to avenge. He walked quickly back to his office, his mind racing. He had to act. He had to find the truth about the Rome accident, before the council or Volkov did, and before the hope of her being Alessia became too powerful to manage. He opened the encrypted folder again, staring at the 99.9% match. He closed his eyes, fighting the desperate urge to weep with relief and terror. He knew what he had to do. He had to be ruthless. He would continue to treat Alara as the protected relative, the key to the past, while simultaneously investigating the conspiracy of her identity. He had to save her life and keep her truth hidden from his own organization. He hurried down to the vault. Alara was sleeping on a makeshift bed, the light casting her face in a soft, ethereal glow. She looked peaceful and heartbreakingly familiar. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her hair, resisting the urge to touch. "Alessia," he thought, the name a silent prayer. "If you are here, I will save you again. I promise." He rose, his expression set with grim determination. He knew the path ahead was agonizingly dangerous, but the knowledge that his great love might be alive filled him with a power he hadn't felt in years. He would use every dark connection, every ruthless tactic he possessed, not for revenge, but for the fierce, unwavering protection of the woman he loved. And as he looked at her sleeping form, he felt the deep, overwhelming truth that love was not a weakness, but the only thing strong enough to defeat the darkness closing in. The tension in the Moretti organization was a palpable, dangerous thing. Victor felt it humming beneath every conversation, every report, every polite glance from his subordinates. The 30-day ultimatum given by the council was a ticking clock, but in reality they had already decided. They had tasted his fear in the diner, and they saw Alara not as a key to the truth, but as the fragile point where their leader could be broken. For a week, Victor worked with a savage, relentless focus. He used the council's suspicion to his advantage, pretending Alara was a caged animal he was merely studying. He maintained his distance in the vault, forcing himself to be the cold protector, despite the secret knowledge that the woman sleeping just feet away was his wife, Alessia. He devoted all his energy to finding the person who had staged the Rome accident and rescued her. But the council, led by the calculating coldness of Dario, didn't trust patience or subtlety. They valued stability above all else, and Alara's mere existence was a threat to their business interests. They saw Victor's refusal to eliminate her as a profound weakness, a sentimental flaw that would destroy them all. On a rainy afternoon, while Victor was downtown orchestrating a complicated diversion to check the European adoption files, the council acted. They held an emergency, unsanctioned meeting at a neutral, secret location. The vote was swift and unanimous. The ghost wife had to go. The plan was simple, brutal, and executed by men who answered only to the council, bypassing Victor's personal security network entirely. The hit team, wearing black, unmarked gear, infiltrated the heavily guarded mansion. They didn't come through the main door. They came through the obscure maintenance tunnels, routes that the council, being the founders of the entire operation, knew intimately. They were ghosts in Victor's own architecture. Alara was in the vault. She had been trying to piece together the last coherent memories she had before the fire. A frantic, hazy image of a woman, a loud argument, and the smell of smoke. The quiet of the vault, her supposed sanctuary, was suddenly invaded by a sharp metallic screech as the outer vault door was cut open with a high-powered torch. The security system in the vault was independent, and the alarm shrieked immediately, a sound that split the silence of the basement. Alara scrambled up, fear overwhelming her. She grabbed the sealed envelope and a heavy flashlight, backing into the darkest corner of the room. The hit team poured in. They were professionals, silent, quick, and emotionless. They moved past the files, ignoring the treasure trove of secrets, focusing only on the target, the small, terrified woman clutching an envelope. She was no match for them. Elara fought, kicking and struggling, her sheer bravery making the men pause for a second, but they overwhelmed her easily. They covered her mouth, subdued her, and dragged her out of the vault. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes. Meanwhile, a mile away, Victor's secure phone rang, flashing an emergency code, the code for the vault perimeter breach. Victor stopped mid-sentence in his conversation, his blood running instantly cold. That alarm was impossible. He had personally designed the security on that room. Marcus! Victor roared into the phone, his voice shaking with a terror he hadn't felt since the moment Alessia died. The vault. No. I'm coming. He dropped everything, abandoning the complex operation he had been running. He ran out of the building, tearing through the streets in his own vehicle, driving like a maniac. All the professionalism, all the control was gone. He was just a man desperate to protect the only person left he truly loved. When Victor arrived back at the mansion, the chaos was controlled, but the silence was deafening. Marcus and the house guards were already in the basement. They found the main vault door cut open and the room empty save for the scattered papers. Victor strode into the vault, his face a mask of cold, terrifying fury. He didn't look at the files. He looked at the emptiness where Elara had been moments ago. The security logs, Victor snapped, his voice barely audible, shaking with suppressed rage. Who bypassed the perimeter? Marcus, white-faced, handed him a printout. The logs showed not an external breach but a failure of the internal security system on the maintenance route, a system only the council knew about. It wasn't external, Victor, Marcus whispered fearfully. It was internal. They used the old access codes. Only the founders knew those. Victor took the printout. He didn't need to read it. He knew instantly. Betrayal. The council hadn't waited. They had taken his most precious secret, the woman who might be his wife, and condemned her to death to save their business. He crumpled the paper in his fist, the sound like dry thunder. His heart was screaming the name Alessia. He had risked everything, lied to his allies and fought his enemies, only to be stabbed in the back by the very men he was supposed to lead. They did this, Victor stated, his voice flat with murderous intent. Dario. The rest of them. They think I'm weak. They think eliminating her will restore order. He slammed his fist down on the steel desk, the metallic reverberation echoing the seismic shift in his world. They don't know who she is, he raged, turning his terrifying gaze on Marcus. They don't know what they've taken. They just signed their own death warrants. He felt a despair so profound it threatened to suffocate him, but the DNA test, the 99.9% match, pulled him back. He wasn't just losing an asset, he was losing his wife for the second time. And this time he was alive and powerful enough to prevent it. The grief was instantly weaponized into a singular, savage resolve. The rules were gone. The loyalty to the council was dead. Now there was only the rescue. Victor walked to the secure communications terminal and began issuing orders with a speed and clarity that Marcus had never witnessed, organizing a vast citywide hunt. Cancel all existing operations, Victor commanded, his voice ice cold. We are in crisis mode. I want every single contact, every eye, every whisper of information focused on one thing: finding the council's private detention center. Find Dario. Find Enzo. And find her. He looked at Marcus, his black eyes burning with a terrifying mix of love and fury. And Marcus, from this moment on, we don't have a council. We have traitors. And traitors are eliminated. He had been forced to hide the truth to protect her. Now the council had forced his hand. He would tell the world who she was if necessary, but he would not let her die. As Victor stood in the wreckage of the vault, his sanctuary and his secret violated, he felt the heavy burden of his past failures. He had failed to save Alessia the first time. But this was a second chance, a miracle dressed as a deadly threat. He would not fail again. He would bring her back, and he would make the men who betrayed him pay a price so profound it would become legend. The architect of crime was now the guardian of love, and his rage was boundless. The hunt was on, and amidst the desperation and the danger, A fierce, unbreakable promise of justice and reunion was the only thing keeping the powerful, heartbroken man moving forward. Victor Moretti was not simply a man who controlled crime. He was a machine built for war. Once the betrayal of the council was confirmed, the architect gave way to the executioner. His focus was singular, his methods ruthless. He needed to find Alara before the council's hit squad could carry out the execution order. His network moved with impossible speed, fueled by his desperate rage and the fear of his men, who knew their boss was fighting for his very soul. Within hours, Marcus had pinpointed the council's secret detention compound, an old, abandoned warehouse district by the docks, perfect for making people disappear. Victor didn't wait for a large team. He went immediately, leading only a small hand-picked group of the most loyal, most lethal men. He was wearing not a tailored suit but tactical gear, and his eyes were cold, terrifying voids of singular purpose. The confrontation was quick and incredibly brutal. Victor didn't negotiate, he didn't demand. He simply attacked. He breached the warehouse with explosive force, moving through the dimly lit corridors like a hurricane. The council's hired guards were skilled, but they were no match for the man fighting for his impossible second chance at love. Inside the warehouse, Alara was bound to a chair, terrified but defiant. Dario and Enzo were there, watching the door, waiting for the final word to silence her forever. The roar of the breach, the shattering glass, and the sound of rapid, heavy gunfire were the only warnings. Dario and Enzo scrambled, realizing too late that they had not simply angered Victor. They had woken a monster. Victor found Alara in a small, damp office. He kicked the door open, his eyes instantly locking onto her, his impossible living ghost. "Alara!" he roared, a sound of relief and fury. He leveled his weapon, eliminating the remaining guards who stood between them. Dario, seeing his chance slip away, grabbed a pistol from the desk. "You are finished, Victor!" Dario screamed, aiming not at Victor but directly at Alara's head. "She is a distraction. She ruins everything." Victor didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, throwing his massive body between the gun and Alara. The shot cracked through the small room like a whip. Victor stumbled, a sharp, searing pain ripping through his shoulder. The force of the impact spun him around, but he stayed on his feet, his hand instinctively snapping up and delivering a final, crushing blow that knocked Dario unconscious and sent the gun skittering across the floor. He was bleeding heavily, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he was victorious. He stumbled toward Alara, cutting her restraints loose with a single slash of his tactical knife. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice strained. "I'm fine. But you're bleeding," Alara whispered, her fear for herself instantly replaced by terror for him. She saw the wound, deep, messy, and pouring blood. "Get out of here." Victor ordered his men, who quickly secured the perimeter and dragged the unconscious traitors away. Now, the moment they were alone, Victor's strength gave out. He slid heavily to the floor, leaning back against the cold, damp wall. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain was a shocking, unbearable fire. "It's just the shoulder," he muttered, trying to wave her away. "I need to stop the bleeding. Call Marcus." But Alara wasn't listening. She knelt beside him, ripping a piece of clean cloth from the hem of her simple t-shirt. He pressed it hard against the wound, trying to stanch the flow. She looked at his face, the sweat, the pain, the exhaustion, and saw the raw, selfless love in his eyes. Suddenly, as her hands pressed firmly against his wound, the pain and the adrenaline of the rescue became a catalyst. Flash. A sharp, vivid image assaulted her mind. Not a dream, not a vague memory, but a perfect, crystal-clear moment. She saw herself younger, dressed in a beautiful white gown, standing under a canopy of flowers. Her hair was swept up and she was smiling with a fierce, blinding joy. And standing opposite her, his eyes full of devotion, was Victor. The image was perfect. A wedding day. Her wedding day. The vision made her gasp and she pulled her hand away, shaking. "What is it?" Victor asked weakly, frowning at her sudden pallor. Alara didn't answer. Another memory was flooding in, warm and sweet, pushing through the wall of her amnesia. Flash. A soft, dark bedroom. She was rocking a tiny bundle in her arms, humming a gentle, wordless tune. She felt a familiar weight and warmth settle next to her. She looked up and there was Victor watching her, his stern face softened by overwhelming tenderness. He reached out and stroked her cheek. "I love," he murmured in the memory, the Italian accent thick with affection. "The world is better because you are in it, mia Stella." The lullaby. The sweet, intimate word, Stella star. The memory wasn't a file. It was feeling, pure and overwhelming. The feeling of being loved wholly and completely by this man who had just taken a bullet for her. The terror on Alara's face was total. She looked from the vivid memory in her mind to the powerful, bleeding man struggling against the wall. "I shouldn't know that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I shouldn't have your wedding day in my head. I shouldn't remember you calling me my love." She stood up abruptly, stumbling back, the cloth falling from her hands. She finally realized the profound, terrifying truth that the DNA test had revealed. She was not Alara Peterson. She was Alessia Moretti. "Who am I?" she cried out, clutching her head. The floodgates were open and the memories, the joy, the secrets, the reasons for the great deception, were rushing in, threatening to drown her. "You are my husband. You're Victor." "But how?" "I died." Victor watched her break down, his own pain forgotten in the face of her shattering realization. The moment of truth, the moment he had both desperately wished for and dreaded, had arrived. He couldn't lie anymore. He struggled to sit up, reaching for her with his uninjured hand, his eyes burning with tears he refused to shed. "You didn't die," Victor said, his voice a broken whisper of relief and exhaustion. "You were hit by those forces in Rome. But someone, your protector, faked the accident, took advantage of your amnesia from the fire, and sealed you away perfectly, replacing your body with someone else's. They made you Alara Peterson to save your life. Because you were my weakness, mia Stella, and they knew they couldn't touch me if they couldn't touch you." He offered her his hand. "The memories are coming back because the danger and the truth are forcing them through. You are Alessia Moretti. And I am your husband. And I swore I would find you." Alara stared at his hand. The truth was monstrous, unbelievable, yet completely confirmed by the violent, selfless act he had just committed. He hadn't just saved an asset, he had saved his love. Her fear was still immense. Fear of the conspiracy, the memory loss, the years of lying. But deeper than the fear, the recognition, the profound, life-altering love she saw in his eyes, was beckoning her. She wasn't an empty shell of a waitress anymore. She was a woman with a powerful, dangerous history, and a husband who had torn his world apart to find her. Taking a shuddering breath, Alara made the choice. She didn't have time to process the trauma or the conspiracy. She had to save the man who had just saved her. She knelt again, taking his hand not as a stranger or a ghost, but as a wife, the warmth of his skin against hers confirming the final, beautiful truth. "We need to stop this bleeding, my love," she said, the intimate title feeling utterly natural on her tongue. Her terror was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce, protective love. A love so strong it had survived amnesia and death itself. She ripped a clean strip of fabric from the discarded clothing nearby and began expertly wrapping his shoulder wound, the memory of her own brief medical training from her old life instantly returning. She worked quickly, her eyes locked on his, a lifetime of love and gratitude pouring out. In the dark, shattered warehouse, amidst the lingering scent of smoke and betrayal, the powerful Mafia boss found his life, his love, and his soul returned to him. Hope had won a stunning, brutal victory. As Alessia finished binding his wound and looked at him with clear, loving eyes, she knew the fight was far from over, but love had survived the impossible, and together, they would face whatever justice demanded. The immediate aftermath of the rescue was a blur of efficiency and quiet retribution. Victor, wounded but revitalized, had ensured Alara, or rather Alessia, whose memories were now flooding back in powerful, painful waves, was safe. The traitors on the council were swiftly and justly dealt with. The betrayal was final, and the cleanup was unforgiving. Alessia and Victor returned to the mansion's vault, not as protector and protected, but as husband and wife, survivors of a 3-year deception. They were healing, piecing together the broken fragments of their life, but the central question remained. Who had orchestrated the grand deception? Who had the power and the motive to fake a death, replace a body, and implement a trauma-based identity replacement? Victor had a prime suspect, his former consigliere Lorenzo. Lorenzo had been Victor's most trusted advisor, a man who knew every secret, every weakness, and every dark corner of the Moretti operation. He had disappeared 5 years ago, stealing a significant amount of assets and leaving no trace. Everyone assumed he was living a quiet life of luxury in South America, but Victor always suspected he was playing a longer, darker game. Using the information gathered from the captured council members and the initial leads from the Rome accident, Victor tracked Lorenzo to a heavily fortified, isolated property outside the city. Victor went alone this time, his mind sharp, his spirit fierce, Alessia's love fueling him. Victor cornered Lorenzo in a subterranean lab beneath the property, a room filled with strange equipment and dimly lit computers, a far cry from the elegant world of Mafia bookkeeping. Lorenzo, dressed in a casual but expensive black uniform, didn't look like a typical mobster. He looked like a cold, brilliant scientist. He offered no resistance when Victor entered, merely a chillingly calm smile. "Victor," Lorenzo said, his voice smooth and familiar, echoing the pleasantries of a forgotten past. "I knew you would find us eventually. You always were predictable when motivated by sentiment." "Us?" Victor demanded, his gun steady, aimed directly at Lorenzo's heart. "Where is Alessia's body? And why did you destroy 3 years of my life to create Alara Peterson?" Lorenzo sighed, gesturing around the strange lab with a sweep of his hand. Alessia's body, the one at the funeral, was a close match, an accident victim from another country. The disappearance was masterful, if I may say so. And as for Alara... He leaned against a steel workbench. "Alara Peterson was not created to ruin your life, old friend. She was created to save Alessia Moretti." Lorenzo began to speak, revealing a conspiracy so twisted and horrifying that it sounded like something from a nightmare, yet was tragically grounded in the real world of power and corruption. 5 years ago I betrayed you, yes. But I did it for a purpose," Lorenzo admitted. "I was recruited by a shadow organization funded by a very powerful, corrupt politician, Senator Romano. Romano's family is very old, very secretive, and they believed their bloodline held a key to, well, let's call it enhanced intelligence." Lorenzo explained that Alessia's aristocratic Italian family was part of this lineage, and Romano had been obsessed with using a family member for an illegal experimental program. The key was to study the brain's resilience after extreme trauma. When Alessia escaped her family years ago, she went into hiding, but Romano found her, Lorenzo continued. He wanted her genetic code for the project. When she married you, she became protected, but you also made her the perfect high-profile target. Victor's grip tightened on his weapon. "And what did this project do?" "It's called the Phoenix Protocol," Lorenzo said, a glint of dark pride in his eyes. "It's an advanced, illegal form of psychological therapy. If a subject suffers overwhelming trauma, like the fire Alara endured at age 5, the memory removal process is accelerated. We then replaced her core identity with a new, simplified, non-threatening persona, Alara Peterson, to hide her from Romano's hunters." He looked directly at Victor, his expression almost apologetic. The death in Rome was not Alessia dying. It was her final, desperate attempt to save herself when she realized the hunters were closing in. She found a moment of opportunity, and using the trauma she already had, she willingly went into the identity replacement program. She had me fake the body, and she had herself erased to become Alara. The truth was a punch to the gut. Alessia hadn't been saved by a mysterious protector. She had engineered her own salvation by willingly becoming an amnesiac ghost. She had chosen to forget herself and her husband just to survive. "And you helped her do this?" Victor asked, his voice low with raw pain. "I helped her survive, Victor," Lorenzo corrected. "I used the funds I took from you to finance the Phoenix Protocol here. I was the last person she trusted. She saw no other way to ensure her enemies would stop looking. She became Alara, and I hid her in the small Canadian town, confident that the fire would be the final irreversible seal on her past." Lorenzo shrugged, a gesture of profound cynicism. The system worked. She was hidden for 3 years. She was Alessia reborn through an illegal forced identity replacement. A new life, a clean slate to save the old one. "And the resemblance," Victor whispered, the pieces clicking into place. Volkov's terror. He knew of Romano's project. He thought she was a supernatural curse. "Precisely," Lorenzo confirmed. Volkov didn't fear a double. He feared the success of the Phoenix Protocol. He feared what a truly reborn, untraceable Alessia could do to the power structure. The confrontation ended swiftly. Lorenzo, having delivered his chilling confession, accepted his fate. Victor did not hesitate to exact justice for the 3 years of agonizing lies, but he didn't do it with anger. He did it with the cold finality of a man closing the most painful chapter of his life. He returned to the mansion, exhausted, his body aching, but his heart now fiercely certain. He found Alessia waiting for him in the vault, surrounded by the remnants of the life she had once desperately fled. He knelt beside her, pulling her close. "It was Lorenzo," he whispered, holding her tightly. "And it was all for your safety. You weren't murdered, my love. You faked your death. You chose to become Ilera, to survive. You chose a new, safe life over a dangerous memory." Alessia sobbed into his shoulder, the pain of the revelation immense, but the comfort of his presence overwhelming. "I remember the fear," she choked out. "The fear of the fire, the fear of Romano. I remember saying goodbye to you." The truth was horrifying, born of betrayal and illegal science, but it was also a testament to Alessia's incredible will to live. She had saved herself. As the sun began to rise, casting a faint, hopeful light into the cold vault, Victor looked at the woman in his arms. She was his wife, returned by a miracle they couldn't explain. He had the truth and he had justice for the traitors. But most importantly, he had love. He gently pulled back, looking into her eyes that held both the ghost of Ilera's innocence and the fierce fire of Alessia's spirit. "We have to go, my love," Victor said, a slight, resolute smile touching his lips. "We have the truth. Now we use it. We build our life again, one that no council, no politician, and no memory replacement program can ever touch." Alessia nodded, wiping her eyes. The terrifying truth had brought them together, stronger than before. She had lost her past, but she had regained her husband, and she knew that love, even when facing the darkest betrayal, was the most powerful force in the world. They had survived, they had won, and their future, though dangerous, was theirs to write together. The days following the memory return procedure were the quietest, yet most emotionally volatile, of their reunion. Alessia was technically whole, but internally she was a battlefield. She was a woman who could discuss Renaissance art one moment and calculate the minimum wage required to survive in a service industry the next. She could speak fluent Italian and slang from the Canadian suburbs. The personality of Ilera, resilient, kind, and humbly focused on survival, was fused with the personality of Alessia, passionate, strategic, and accustomed to danger. The weight of this duality was crushing. One evening, Alessia found Victor in his study, going over the complex plans to dismantle Senator Romano's operation. She walked in and stood by the desk, watching him for a long moment. "I need to ask you something, Victor," she said, her voice quiet but strained. Victor immediately stopped working, turning his full, undivided attention to her. The intensity of his gaze had always been a comfort, but now it felt like an interrogation. "Anything, Mia Stella," he answered, using the affectionate Italian term that was both Alessia's and now hers. "Do you love me as the woman who stands here now, or do you only love the ghost of Alessia Moretti?" she asked, the words pouring out in a rush of vulnerability. "Do you see me, the woman who worked at the diner, or are you just grateful that the woman you married has finally been shipped back to you, slightly used?" The question held the agony of her identity conflict. Ilera's innocence was gone, but so was the easy confidence of Alessia. She was afraid he had simply found a perfect replacement for his grief and that the quiet, simple person she had become was an unwanted complication. Victor rose slowly and walked around the desk, his expression serious, not angry. He took her hands in his grip firm and reassuring. "Look at me, my love," he insisted. "When I first saw you in the diner, I saw Alessia. That's the truth. I saw the face that nearly killed me with grief 3 years ago." He paused, letting the truth hang in the air. "But when I brought you here, and especially after the council's betrayal, that changed. I was protecting Alessia, yes, but I was falling in love with Ilera." He pulled her closer, his voice low and heartfelt. "Ilera was the only person who had the strength to look a man like me in the eyes and demand justice. Ilera was the one who didn't back down from a death threat. Ilera was the one who insisted on finding the truth, even if it meant risking her own sanity." He gently stroked the back of her hand. "The woman I love now is the woman who is standing in front of me, the strong, fearless survivor who came back from the dead." You are the resilience of Alara, fused with the passion of Alessia. I don't love a replacement or a ghost. I love the person you have become. You are not a duplicate, you are an evolution. His powerful words were a balm to her soul, but the fear was deeply rooted. But the memories. When I laugh, sometimes it's Alessia's laugh. When I cook, I use Alara's recipes. I feel fractured. Then we make them one life, Victor countered simply, meeting her gaze with unwavering certainty. We honor Alara's hard-won survival, and we use Alessia's strategic mind to dismantle the threat. You are not a victim of two lives. You are the beneficiary of an incredible, impossible survival. The emotional conflict was slowly pushing them apart. Victor, focused on justice, often treated her with the detached professionalism of a partner in crime, while Alessia/Alara craved the simple, uncomplicated affection of the husband she remembered from before the trauma. The danger was the only thing forcing them to stay physically close. A ringing alarm on Victor's communication terminal shattered the intimate moment. "Sir, we have confirmation," Marcus's voice cut through the air. "Senator Romano is moving to his private estate outside Rome tonight. It's now or never." The need for action immediately forced the emotional crisis to the back seat. Alessia/Alara's face hardened, the strategic fire of Alessia instantly overriding Alara's soft vulnerability. "Romano is making a run for it," Alessia stated, her mind racing, processing the logistics instantly. "That estate will be impenetrable, but the transfer will expose his vulnerabilities. We have to move now." She looked at Victor, and the duality disappeared, replaced by the singular focus of a woman preparing for war. "The council's funds that Lorenzo stole? Romano used them to finance the Phoenix Protocol," she explained, the memories of the conspiracy perfectly clear. "He'll have documents proving the whole thing, the identity replacement, the fake death, at the estate. That's the only proof we have." Victor nodded, the transition from lover to commander complete. "We move tonight. This is not about revenge. This is about ending the threat so you can finally be safe." He walked over to his war map, but then he paused, looking back at her. He didn't see a fragile woman. He saw his equal. "We go together," he said firmly. "But you stay back. You are the proof. You are the victory. I will not risk losing you again." Alessia/Alara walked over to him, her hands steady. "No," she countered, her voice low and decisive. "I know that estate. I know Romano's movements. I need to be there. I survived being erased once. I'm not going to sit here and wait while you put yourself in danger." She looked at him with a fierce determination that was pure Alara, but the knowledge in her eyes was all Alessia. "We are one now, Victor. If you protect me, I protect you." Victor stared at her, seeing the whole, complex, beautiful woman he loved, the one who had defied death and memory loss. He conceded with a slow nod, a genuine, loving smile touching his lips. He finally understood that he hadn't just gotten his wife back. He had found a partner who was stronger and more resilient than the one he had lost. They spent the next few hours meticulously planning the final confrontation. Though the mission was fraught with danger, the air between them was clean, charged with mutual respect and a fierce, unbreakable love. The internal struggle was postponed, but the hope was concrete. Once justice was secured, their life, their single, unified, loving life, could finally begin. The discovery of Senator Romano's connection to the Phoenix Protocol and the Council's betrayal had lit the fuse, but it was Lorenzo, the mastermind now exposed, who threw the match. Convinced that Alessia/Alara's recovered memories held the final key to untold power, secrets not just about Romano, but about the very structure of the Mafia world, Lorenzo launched a full-scale, desperate war. He intended to capture Alessia/Alara, extract the rest of the truth, and use it to elevate himself to the supreme position of global power. He didn't come for revenge, he came for the knowledge locked inside her mind. The first strike was brutal. Coordinated attacks on key Moretti assets and allies, intended to cripple Victor's infrastructure and force him out of hiding. But Lorenzo had underestimated one thing: the ferocious, cold strategy of a man fighting for his love, now backed by the complete memories of his wife. Victor and Alessia/Alara stood side by side in the mansion's war room, no longer isolated. Victor had reached out to the few remaining crime families who valued honor and stability over Lorenzo's chaos. They responded, recognizing that Lorenzo's betrayal threatened every organized structure. The loyalty paid off. The Moretti mansion became the central command post for a coalition of determined old-school bosses. And at the heart of the strategy was Alessia/Alara. The woman who used to fold napkins was now coordinating a global counteroffensive. Alessia's strategic brilliance, honed by years in the aristocracy and proximity to the Moretti Empire, combined perfectly with Alara's grounded practicality. Lorenzo will target the old shipping routes, Alessia/Alara stated, tracing a line on the massive digital map with a steady hand. He always believed the money was in logistics. He won't use the secure channels. He'll use the forgotten docks, the ones we used to call the shadow ports 5 years ago. Victor watched her, his expression a mix of awe and fierce pride. Alara's resilience, Alessia's knowledge. She was unstoppable. The shadow ports are too exposed, Victor argued. Why risk it? Because he needs the cash to fund the full-scale operation in Rome with Romano, she countered instantly, her eyes flashing with tactical brilliance. He's desperate. He'll hit the London docks tomorrow night. We move first. Victor issued the orders, following her lead without question. For the first time since their reunion he was completely whole, trusting her strategy implicitly. The battle for the London docks was fierce, a cinematic clash of loyalty versus ambition. Victor's unified front crushed Lorenzo's hastily gathered forces. They dismantled his transport network, crippling his financial lifeline to Senator Romano. But Lorenzo was elusive. He knew the game too well. The final showdown happened not in a public place, but in an abandoned, opulent theater, a dramatic, fitting backdrop for the end of their saga. Victor and Alessia/Alara tracked Lorenzo there, knowing he would seek a place where he could control the narrative. When they found him, Lorenzo was alone, waiting. He was standing on the stage beneath a single dusty spotlight, looking utterly defeated but strangely serene. A beautiful performance, Alessia, Lorenzo called out, his voice echoing in the empty hall. You are everything I hoped you would be, intelligent, resilient, and utterly magnificent. You destroyed 3 years of our lives, Lorenzo, Victor growled, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip. You subjected my wife to an illegal experiment and faked her death. For power and money. Money, yes. But not just for myself, Lorenzo said, smiling sadly. I did it for the future, Victor. A future that required Alessia's sacrifice. I saw the power of Romano's project and I saw a chance for a different world order. Alessia/Alara stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, a fusion of both her personalities. That future ends tonight, Lorenzo. You can't use us. Lorenzo sighed. I suppose not. You have the armies, Victor. You have the truth. But I have one last piece of information for you. A secret that changes everything about your victory. He looked directly at Alessia/Alara, his eyes suddenly sharp with malice and a strange pity. You remember the fire when you were 5, Piccola Stella? The trauma that allowed the Phoenix Protocol to work so perfectly. Alessia/Alara went rigid. It was an accident. I remember the smoke. It was no accident, Lorenzo countered, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. The fire was set by Alessia's family. Not Romano, but her own noble, aristocratic family. They knew she was pregnant, and they couldn't allow a child of their pure bloodline to be raised by a common criminal like you, Victor. They tried to eliminate both of you that night. Alessia saved the child, but the trauma of the fire cost her the memories of her first 5 years. The revelation slammed into them both with stunning force. The original trauma, the fire that had cost her childhood memories, was not a random accident that later facilitated her escape. It was an act of cold-blooded assassination, targeting her unborn child and herself. She was pregnant? Victor whispered, his world spinning again. The wedding, the lullaby, a tiny bundle in her arms. Lorenzo nodded, a triumphant look flashing across his face. The child survived, hidden and raised separately after that night. That child is the real reason Alessia had to disappear in Rome. She feared her family would target the child next. Her final legacy wasn't her rebirth, Victor. It was protecting the child. He pointed a final dramatic finger at the fusion of the two women. You, Alessia, were saving your child when you chose the Phoenix Protocol. You remembered the fire, And you knew you had to disappear to protect the only person left who carried your true bloodline. The child is hidden away safe. But only you, Alessia, know where. Lorenzo didn't wait for Victor's enraged reaction. He had delivered his final devastating blow. A secret that ensured their victory was simultaneously the beginning of a new complex mission. Victor's men moved in, but the damage was done. The truth was out. Victor and Alessia/Alara were left alone on the stage, the vast, dark theater echoing with the final horrifying secret. A child, Alessia/Alara whispered, the memories of the fire, the trauma, and the tiny bundle in her arms coalescing into a shattering new truth. I have a child. I have a daughter. The memory of the baby's face, the secret safe place she had arranged for the child years ago. It was all there. Her true final act of love was not just sacrificing her identity for survival, but sacrificing it for her child's life. Victor walked to her, his rage now replaced by a profound, life-altering shock. He had fought a war for his wife, and discovered he had a daughter he never knew existed. He gently pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. The external war was won. The traitors were defeated. But the internal, most important fight had just begun. We will find her, my love, Victor swore, his voice thick with emotion. We will use every asset, every memory, every contact. You saved yourself, you defeated your enemies, and you gave us a family. We will bring her home. Alessia/Alara leaned into his chest, the final terrifying secret now a beacon of hope and a new, unbreakable purpose. She had survived fire, memory loss, and the worst kind of betrayal. She had found her husband, and now she knew she had a daughter waiting for her. The journey had been dark, but the final reward, justice, love, and a family whole again, was the ultimate heartwarming victory. The final word of Lorenzo's confession, the secret of the child, had brought immense, shocking joy, but it left the central, agonizing question of identity unresolved. Alessia/Alara had accepted being both women, but the science of the 99.9% match still hovered like a phantom. Why was she genetically identical to a woman who had willingly erased her own memory? Victor, now fully engaged in cleaning up the remnants of Lorenzo's operation, found the answer tucked away in a secure digital file on Lorenzo's server. A final, heavily encrypted message meant only for Victor, revealing the deepest secret of the Moretti bloodline. Victor sat down, reading the text, his powerful frame slumping in disbelief. He had been wrong about everything, but in a way that offered salvation, not despair. He went immediately to Alessia/Alara, who was sitting quietly in the recovered vault, looking at a small childhood drawing that the memories had confirmed belonged to her lost daughter. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and hope. Lorenzo's final file, Victor began, his voice low with a strange mix of shock and wonder. He didn't just confess to the Phoenix Protocol. He revealed the ultimate ancient secret of the old families, the truth about your identity. He sat beside her, gently taking her hand. You are not Alessia Moretti, reborn or saved from amnesia. You were never Alessia. Alessia/Alara stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. But the DNA, the memories, the love. I remember our wedding. The DNA is correct. You are genetically identical because you are Alessia's biological twin sister, Victor revealed, the words heavy with profound finality. Lorenzo revealed that the Moretti lineage is tied to an ancient, ridiculous prophecy. A twin birth, according to the superstition, would split the power of the throne and invite internal chaos, the very chaos the council always feared. He explained that the family years ago had orchestrated a massive deception. To protect the bloodline and the throne, they secretly separated the twins at birth. One, Alessia, was raised with the family and the dangerous legacy. The other, you, Alara, was handed off, deliberately given a fake sealed birth identity to be hidden completely. You were meant to be safe, oblivious to the curse, Victor explained. When the fire happened and you suffered amnesia, the trauma created a blank slate. That's why the Phoenix Protocol worked so perfectly 3 years ago. When Alessia faked her death, she transferred only the key memories, our life, our love, and the essential memory of your child, into your mind to give you the resources to survive. You received her memories, but you were always the twin, Alara. The relief, the sheer, profound release, hit Alara like a physical wave. She wasn't a clone, a ghost, or a replacement. She was not a fractured person fighting an impossible duality. She was Alara, A resilient survivor who had gained the wisdom and love of her sister, Alessia. The memories of the two lives merged not because she was split, but because the survivor, Ilara, had inherited the essential truth she needed from her sister. A sob escaped her, but it wasn't a sound of sorrow. It was release. She broke down, gripping Victor's coat, weeping for the simple, beautiful truth. "I am Ilara," she repeated through her tears, the name now feeling whole and true. "I am my own person. I have my own life. I just carry my sister's love and her survival guide." Victor wrapped her in his arms, holding her tightly as the tears poured out. Tears of 3 years of confusion and a lifetime of being hidden. When the storm finally subsided, Ilara leaned back, looking at him with clear, bright eyes. Eyes that held the combined strength of the waitress and the aristocratic strategist. "You were so scared of my face," Ilara remembered softly, touching his cheek. Victor nodded, his own eyes welling up with emotion. "When I first saw you, I was terrified that I had finally lost my mind. That grief had created a ghost. I was scared of the resemblance, yes. But that fear faded the moment I saw your courage." He took her hands again, his powerful grip unwavering. "Now I am no longer scared of your resemblance, Ilara. I am scared of losing you again. The person you are, the one who fought the council, the one who worked the double shifts, the one who carries Alessia's memories in your own strength. That is the woman I love. The ghost is gone. Only my future remains, and that future is you." Ilara smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that encompassed all her experiences. She had her identity, her life, and the profound love of the man who had torn his world apart to save her. "Then our first mission as a whole unified family must be to find my child," Ilara stated, the fierce protectiveness of a mother immediately asserting itself. "Alessia gave me her memories for that purpose. We use the truth and we bring my daughter home." Victor kissed her hand, a tender, respectful gesture of profound commitment. "We find her. And then we live a life that is so quiet, so filled with simple joy, that the Mafia throne and its ridiculous prophecies can never touch us again." He stood up, offering his hand not as a boss or a protector, but as a devoted partner. Ilara took it, rising beside him. The vault, once a cage of secrets and grief, now felt like the launch pad for their new life. They were Ilara and Victor, two survivors, united by a love strong enough to defeat conspiracy, memory loss, and the ancient curse of a Mafia bloodline. The ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest, and their future, a family built on unwavering love, hard-won justice, and the beautiful, simple reality of Ilara's true self, was ready to begin. Hope, justice, and love had completely, wholeheartedly won. We have come to the end of the story. Thank you for watching to the end. Share your opinion about this story in the comments below. I like getting feedback from my audience. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of our heartwarming stories.